On this day, 1987, Adrian Lyne's massively successful suspense thriller Fatal Attraction opens in theaters.
I'm scared, Jimmy.
You play fair with me?
Do you have an affair with her?
I'll play fair with you.
I don't want to lose my family.
How could you do that?
You're scared of me, aren't you? You're afraid. Gutless, heartless, spineless.
If you ever come near my family again, I'll kill you. You understand? Daddy! I'm not going to be ignored. Alicia, where's Ellen?
She's gone.
Call the police.
Whatever resentment she's feeling, she's probably got it out of her system.
What if she didn't get it out of her system? What then?
Fatal Attraction.
I guess you thought you'd get away with it. Well, you can't.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Wednesday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks 37 years since the release of a hugely successful, critically praised, polarizing, not for the normal reasons, film. 37 years ago today, Paramount Pictures, I think they were the primary mover, released Adrian Lyne's white hot, in every sense of the term, Fatal Attraction, which was an adaptation of a book by, I want to say the author's name was James Dearden, but the book was called Diversion. It's kind of an interesting title. I'm not familiar with the book. I didn't read it. I've never seen it in print. And I have no idea if it's a faithful adaptation or not. I do know that the screenplay of Fatal Attraction was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. It didn't win. In fact, Fatal Attraction, not the kind of movie that normally would get a lot of award consideration. It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, which is insane, Best Director, and Best Actress, Glenn Close, Best Supporting Actress, Anne Archer. It didn't win. It's really not. I think this movie is overrated, if we're being honest. It kind of falls apart in the final third, and we understand that that was not originally what they were trying to do, but we can get to that. Fatal Attraction, I remember when it came out, and there are certain movies, and 5 years later with Michael Douglas and Basic Instinct, it's not that it's a similar story, but it's a similar kind of hot button issue movie that gets people talking, movie that spurs arguments among couples. And Fatal Attraction really captured the zeitgeist of the moment when people began, or I shouldn't say began, people were very, very nervous about the AIDS crisis. Nobody knew if, let's say, a decade hence, was HIV, AIDS going to be a massive part of our everyday lives or not? It turned out, thank goodness, for most of us, it wasn't. But there was a time, and many boomers or young boomers, elder boomers, Gen Xers, remember that there was a couple of years where everyone was scared shitless about AIDS. And so this movie deals with that from a kind of an indirect tangential angle, because it was in the head of people watching the film that you have a happily married man in Michael Douglas as Dan Gallagher. And the movie takes great pains. It has patience. So this is an interesting film in that it is a suspense thriller. It has moments of edge of your seat, but it also takes the time to develop the characters. And Adrian Lyne, who I'm a big fan of, I don't love Flashdance, but I think what he did with Jacob's Ladder is extraordinary, because that was the number one unproduced screenplay in Hollywood for close to a decade. And when I say number one, meaning that everyone who read it loved it. But at the same time, not one person other than Adrian Lyne said, oh, this can be a movie. Everybody from Steven Spielberg loved it, on down said, this is an incredible script. This could be a great movie if there was any way to make it, and there isn't. So it's just going to remain a great screenplay, but there's no way to make it, that sort of thing. Total Recall, which ended up being made with Arnold, was another. At Close Range, which was made with Sean and Chris Penn and Christopher Walken, Madonna's song Live to Tell, one of her better tunes from that era. But Adrian Lyne, still around, was and is a visionary. He saw things differently than a lot of other filmmakers. And the way that he takes such care to show us that Michael Douglas, he makes good money. He's an attorney. He loves his wife. He adores their daughter. He is presented as an upstanding, moral, and decent man. Now, we don't know enough about him in the early scenes to make a final judgment, and the movie shows that he is pretty easily corruptible. And there are those that would say that given what we learn, was the movie attempting to simply play misdirection, which you could argue that, or were they trying to show that he was a good dude who probably hadn't cheated on his wife before? So I don't know. And the uncertainty, for me, helps the film because we only know what we're presented in the story. So this is a story of infidelity. I hate to say it this way, infidelity gone really wrong. And interestingly, if you rewind the clock 16 years to 1971, you find Clinton Eastwood Jr., aka Clint Eastwood, in his directorial debut in Play Misty for Me, a movie where the entire plot, every beat of the plot is the same as Fatal Attraction. Differences are that Clint's character in Play Misty for Me is not a family man. He's not married. He's a single guy enjoying, wink, wink, the single life. But other than that, he meets a woman who seems just really hot and seems to be on the same page as him as far as we're just going to hook up and there's no reason for us not to have sex when we feel like it. And if I don't feel like ever calling you again, I won't, and you won't get angry with me. Something along those lines. So Play Misty for Me, and this is where audience identification is interesting because Michael Douglas throughout his career has played a lot of very intelligent, well-off, but cold and calculating individuals. Whether it's Nicholas Van Orton in The Game, amazing film by David Fincher, maybe even his best movie other than Fight Club. But Michael Douglas in Wall Street, the first one, the second one, he's played a lot of these kinds of patrician, cold, calculating assholes. Well, Clint Eastwood has played more of what we would just call alpha males. And the interesting thing is if you compare Play Misty for Me, which really set up Clint to have the career that he's enjoyed as a filmmaker, because I don't think anyone in Hollywood, they didn't think that he was much more than just a guy who looked good on the other end of a gun in all those Westerns, and Dirty Harry hadn't even happened yet. But Clint, the alpha male in Play Misty for Me, he is nicer to Jessica Walter's character of Evelyn for far longer in the film than we expect because it's Clint. And Michael Douglas in Fatal Attraction, very early when he realizes that Alex Forrest, that's the character played so incredibly well by Glenn Close, and honestly, I'm still surprised that she did not get that she didn't end up winning Best Actress. I think she's extraordinary, but I happen to be a fan of her in general. I love what she does in The Natural, the kind of good, bad, lightness and dark counterpoint with Kim Basinger's Memo Paris. But Michael Douglas's character gets nasty. I don't want to say sooner than you think, but it's like the guy didn't think it through. And this is where you get into the zeitgeist and the spirit of the time of what was going on in the world in, circa 1987, that people were nervous. So right away, he meets a strange woman. He doesn't really know her. And he's almost he's taking no responsibility before anything happens. By saying something like, when it's intimated, are we going to do something later? When he says something like, I think that's entirely up to you. No, pal, you're married. You have a wife waiting for you at home. You don't know this person at all. What are you doing? She's supposed to be a business associate. That's it. There's nowhere to go here. So he's only thinking in terms of, maybe I can get some free nookie here, and then that's it. He's not imagining, I don't think that it's part of his process that, we'll have sex for an entire weekend and I'll never call this woman again and she's going to be perfectly fine with it. Unfortunately, for a successful professional, for somebody who is presented as a family man, he's very willing to just have no problem cheating on his wife. And in the era in which the movie came out, well, to say that was a red flag, but it's more than just a red flag because previously there was less life and death worry thought process. So here, not only is the guy trashing his vows, showing zero respect for his wife, who he apparently really loves, and his child, it's so important that he hook up with this random woman. It does not put Dan Gallagher in a particularly favorable light, to say the least. Again, in Play Misty for Me, we can take issue with certain actions Clint takes, and I don't think this was a coincidence, some of the adjustments they did in Fatal Attraction. The character of Evelyn is the one who suggests first that they can simply have sex and there are no strings attached. She literally says that to him. I don't believe that Glenn Close's Alex Forrest does the same thing. I don't think that before they do anything in Fatal Attraction, they even talk about that. And the fact that Clint's character isn't married, it makes a big difference. So when we see what happens, and we, in the 1987 area saying, this is fucking crazy. This guy is nuts. What is he doing? And one thing that films of that era, and this has nothing to do with any kind of public health crisis, but there were a number of movies that, and this also, I'll throw Basic Instinct in there, and Cape Fear, the Martin Scorsese, the remake of the Gregory Peck, Robert Mitchum film from the early 1960s. There was more of shadings to protagonists where the main character is relatable, but he might be a fucking asshole. He might be an awful guy. He might not be anything like what we seem. So, for example, in Cape Fear, Robert De Niro's character of Max Cady he's the antagonist. But Nick Nolte's hero is not heroic at all. He's not a good guy. He's a serial philanderer who has humiliated his wife. The daughter doesn't really know. And so we end up rooting for him because the other guy is so much worse. And this movie does that. And even Play Misty for Me to some extent. But if you watch Play Misty for Me, you will be surprised at just how much Clint's character of Dave Garber tries to help. Because they reach a point where, okay, well, they're not going to have sex anymore. Hopefully he can redirect her so she stops fucking killing people or whatever. So this movie plays with a lot of really interesting concepts that when I saw it for the first time as a kid, I never would have, it didn't mean anything for me. And Roger Ebert, my favorite film critic, the late, great Pulitzer Prize winning critic, this is a mild spoiler. There's a moment in the film where Alex Forrest, they're not seeing each other, and she's starting to become a problem. She's not making threats, but she is, by her actions, she is threatening to kind of derail his stable home life. Now, you could argue that he deserves to have it derailed, but that's almost not really the point. She tells him that she is pregnant. And Ebert took issue with Michael Douglas's reaction, that his character immediately being dismissive and basically saying, that's your issue, leave me out of it. He said, would he really do that? Would he really not care? And I actually didn't take issue with that. As a younger person, I was also like, no, I think Roger maybe got this wrong. I remember reading his review. I was about 15 when I bought one of Ebert's books, collections of his reviews that I loved. The Roger Ebert Movie Home Companion. You could find some of them out of print. They're just so much fun to read. He was so good. But that I bought. And even revisiting the film in my 40s, it didn't hold me up because he's in a panic. His character is in dire straits. Did it to himself. He dug his own grave. But with that, there is the attempt to paint Alex Forrest as a tragic figure. And the movie would have been more successful if it had gone and been able to do what the original ending always was. And I can spoil it because, you can see it on YouTube or DVD or whatever it is. I know that the original ending is on YouTube. This film was always supposed to end with Alex Forrest, spoiler, killing herself. And strong evidence implicating Dan Gallagher in the crime. So the film originally was putting forth the idea of there is no such thing as free love, whether or not it's the AIDS era, but even especially during the era of everybody freaking out. They ultimately changed it. And this is where the test screening process gets tricky because audiences the early preview audiences, when the film was wrapped, presumably at, let's say, 2 to 3 months before September, presumably it was completely completed by the summer, preview audiences were enraged. They were so angry. They had a visceral reaction to Douglas's character basically being framed. They just thought it was a crock of shit, that we understand that he's still not okay what he did, but this is unsatisfactory. And they were so angry, the preview audiences just scored the film so low, they brought everybody back for reshoots. And unfortunately, the ending they picked, it's not good. It's just not good. Now, if they had done nothing, because there are instances throughout history where preview screenings went in a certain direction, and if it's a Spielberg or a filmmaker of that level, they don't necessarily have to do what's said. It's a question of where you are in the business and who your bosses are. So if the original ending had been what we saw, we reboot The Matrix and there's no bloodbath in a bathtub ending. The movie climaxes with the song from Madame Butterfly playing, and she kills herself, and Dan Gallagher is arrested, roll credits. I would have not been satisfied. I know. It would have bothered me. But if you ask me, is that better cinema? Yeah, it is. And there are plenty of movies that I could say are brilliant where I am not fans because I find the movie to be very depressing or difficult to watch because it takes us down a path of complete ruin in a story that doesn't necessarily have to go to complete ruin. So when they did the reshoots and they put in the sort of Friday the 13th or Freddy Krueger type ending where the killer is dead, is not dead, or maybe dead, now really dead. It's like Billy Crystal in Princess Bride. Well, she's just mostly dead at this point, and then she'll be all dead. So the film made an insane amount of money. It grossed more than 20 times its production cost. Now, for perspective, the film's budget, including marketing, but the budget is listed at $15 million. I'm going to assume that it was a little bit more than that. It made more than $400 million at the box office, which is completely, It made it made about 340. It was the number I saw was 23 times its or 22 times its production cost. So they say it's 15 million. It made about 340 around the world. And the excitement, this was a movie that got great word of mouth. And unfortunately, with the original ending, it would not have gotten great word of mouth. So this is where you have even though he wasn't involved in the production, the kind of Peter Guber horrendous balance between art and commerce. Guber famously said, you have to make Top Gun before you make Rain Man, which means you have to make a movie people will come to see to try to make the artistic film that people will come to see. And Fatal Attraction would not have been anywhere near as big a hit with the original ending. So yes, they pandered, they buckled. The studio, Sherry Lansing, one of their all-time great executives, what a fucking genius. They felt they had no choice. The scores were so bad. You can't always just do well for artistic purposes. You got to make money. So maybe there are regrets, maybe there aren't. But the film absolutely annihilated at the box office, had everybody talking, and it got nominated for the 6 Oscars. But critics, and in this case, it wasn't just Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert said he walked out of the theater feeling cheated. He said the first hour is so good. This had a chance to be one of the all-time thrillers, and then it went off the deep end. So Roger wanted the original ending. I don't know if he knew about that in the review, but he was incredulous that a film which took great pains to put together a realistic scenario. Family man runs around, the woman gets pissed off. It's all very realistic. It does not feel sensationalized, and it certainly doesn't feel like a Friday the 13th movie of your choice. And then it turns into a slasher film. And he was really mad. He said this could have been a great entertainment instead of just a great near miss. So with Basic Instinct, that movie ended up grossing more 5 years later worldwide, but the budget was 3 times that. Basic Instinct, including marketing, was between 45 and 50 million. So it was a lot of money to make that film. But that's another movie where Michael Douglas's character gets involved with a dangerous woman but again, from a totally different angle, because his character is a single guy who appears to be a danger junkie, an adrenaline addict of some sort, because he goes for a woman that he's pretty sure is a serial killer. Like, you got to be really fucked up. Like Dan Gallagher in Fatal Attraction, he's not going for Alex Forrest if he says, oh, I think she's a serial killer, it's a big turn on for me. No, doesn't work that way. But Fatal Attraction is the kind of movie that it just kind of spoke to a generation, and it is emblematic of the 80s, the trappings of the 80s with the hair and the clothing and the kind of hard-pounding soundtrack and all of that. It is emblematic of the morally conflicted heroes and anti-heroes, and where, yes, there is a hero-villain structure, but it is not conventional because Dan Gallagher's a real asshole. And unfortunately, he gets somewhat of a comeuppance, but you might argue that he doesn't get nearly enough of a comeuppance. Whereas in Play Misty for Me, Dave Garver is just such a genial sort of a guy. It's not a typical, it looks like it'll be a typical Clint character, but he's way nicer than most of the kind of alpha heroes that Clint played. Hell, whether it was in The Beguiled from the same year or whether it was Dirty Harry, Don Siegel, Don Siegel directed The Beguiled also. Clint's character is nowhere near like that, where he's going out of his way to try to be helpful. But the Michael Douglas performance, and he won an Oscar that year as Best Actor for Wall Street. So interesting that those two movies were in theaters at the same time. Well, Wall Street came out a little later, but Fatal Attraction was such an absurd runaway hit. It was still tearing up the box office charts. And it is interesting if you compare what Michael Douglas does in those films. He's a great actor. I mean, it seems obvious to say he's still around, but he is fantastic. I think his performance in Fatal Attraction is terrific, even if his character is fucking scumbag. But what he does as Gordon Gekko, he channels something else. It is a next level, and it is a kind of performance where everybody said he's going to win. And Michael Douglas, yeah, he's a Nepo baby. His father, Kirk Douglas, I know that. But he actually had a bigger career than his dad. And Michael Douglas is a fantastic producer. On top of his versatility and the fact he's been funny in movies, he's just great all around. He produced One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He was in his early 30s when he put that together. Originally, it was going to star his father, and then Kirk kind of aged out of the role. It happens in Hollywood. Sometimes, like Clint Eastwood, Unforgiven, the William Money Killings, as it was originally called, he waited until he aged into the role. Because when he first bought the script in the Outlaw Josie Wales days, Clint said, I'm way too young even at this point. I can't really play this part. He had to kind of grow into it and grow older. But by the time One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and they got Milos Forman and they got everything together with Saul Zaentz, Kirk was too old, and history is thankful that they went with Jack Nicholson. But on the Oscar stage that year, Jack won Best Actor. And was it Louise Fletcher? She won Best Actress. And there's Michael Douglas up there getting the award for Best Director. So if you ever see a picture of a young Jack Nicholson and a young Michael Douglas together and say, what the hell, what awards, what are they holding here? The Oscars. Literally, that's what they're holding there. They're at the 1976 Academy Awards. And so he's just a whiz-bang home run hitter all around. A great star, a fantastic producer. Hey, he produced Face Off. You probably didn't know that either. And originally he was going to star in it, opposite who? Considered it a divorce. I'll be back. It was going to be Michael Douglas and Arnold Schwarzenegger in Face Off. If that had been the film that Arnold did instead of Eraser. The two guys wanted to work together. Arnold had worked with Kirk Douglas in a not a very good movie in the late 70s called The Villain, and he and Michael were friends. Sometimes people in Hollywood are friends, they just never work together. But they were going to do Face Off. I don't know who was supposed to play which role. But it didn't work out. But Michael Douglas stayed on as producer, and he was the point man. He was the key guy in getting Face Off made. He shepherded it through with all the script changes and everything that they ended up doing there. So Michael Douglas, just one of the all-timers from every possible angle. So Fatal Attraction is a movie that, as we speak, it's on Amazon Prime, and MGM was one of the other companies that produced it. Sorry, the ending of the recording got a little cocked up, so we're going to do an ending outside. Thank you so much for joining me. The 37th anniversary of the release of Adrian Lyne's Fatal Attraction, starring Michael Douglas, Glenn Close, and Ann Archer. This has been episode 309 of the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy, I hope, hump day with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.